Okay, well, good to be back here. And as it was stated there earlier, so it's part 22. So I would imagine we'll probably have a few other studies in Deuteronomy. Um, but I think in terms of the Bible Flyover series, we are going to take a little bit of a detour after Deuteronomy, just on a few things, and then come back to the thing about what's happening with the other books of the Bible. So Phil Buchanan and I are doing Bible class, and we're doing kind of a similar thing. I don't know if you remember the little kind of cartoony things that I showed in regard to, I think it was like Leviticus and Numbers. There was it was called the Bible Project, but in terms of explaining, whole books of the Bible. So we're doing that with the Bible class, and Phil has actually put a lot of material and effort together to get that sorted. So what we're doing with the Bible class is we're going through the New Testament, one book a week. And so it's kind of zim bam boom, but so by the end of by April, we'll have the entire New Testament done for the kids. So anyway, so it's a lot of work there as well. But this is part of Deuteronomy chapter 6. And Deuteronomy 6 was where you had the Shema, if you remember, which was, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength." And that is the confession of faith of the children of Israel. So later on in that, well, actually, then a little bit later on in that chapter, there was those two verses that Jesus had quoted when he was tempted. You shall not tempt the Lord your God, and you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Those verses are all in Deuteronomy 6. But as chapter 6 continues on, there is this thing about when your son asks why. So, and I've always found this chapter very, very instructive and very important for parents because kids will ask why. We do what we do in terms of our faith. So we'll look initially at this particular paragraph, and then I'm going to take you down a different sort of a road with this. So, and I think it'll be helpful just in your own Bible study too. When you start picking things together, you think, I've never thought about this. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 20 to 25. So not a big passage, but it says, "When your son asks you in time to come, saying, 'What is the meaning of the testimonies, the statutes, and the judgments which the Lord our God has commanded you?' then you shall say to your son, 'We were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed signs and wonders before our eyes, great and severe, against Egypt, Pharaoh, and all his household. And then he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in to give us the land which he swore to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. And then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us.'" So basically, when the daughter, asks why we do these things, God says, "This is what you say." Okay. So, but what I want to do is I want to look at this grammatically. Okay. And when I say grammatically, I want to look at the sentences. I want to look at how the thing is structured. And you might be kind of rolling your eyes and thinking, why on earth are we going to do this? I learned this in primary school, and I really don't want to visit it again. But I think sometimes when we have an understanding of grammar and how that's broken up, it'll actually help us to read the Bible in a lot better way. Because we're able to break things down, see what's important, what's peripheral. Not that there's anything in the Bible that is unimportant, but sometimes we need to break these things apart so that we see what is going on. So because there are primary things and there are secondary things and there are tertiary things, meaning there's kind of third level stuff. So right. So what I want to do is what I call sentence deconstruction. Okay, and I'm going to first of all say when we speak or write, statements called sentences can be broken down into parts. Okay, so all of us talk. I don't know of anybody here or online that don't talk. You know, we all talk. Some of us talk properly. Some of us don't talk quite properly or use the Queen's English or the King's English or some other monarch's English. But we all communicate, and we communicate using a certain kind of grammar, you know, and a certain kind of vocabulary. So what I'm going to do today is talk about a certain angle of sentence deconstruction, and then next week we'll continue that theme, but looking at it from a slightly different angle. So now I have a sentence here. It says, Allison, okay, bakes ginger cakes and buttery shortbread for the Bible study regularly. Okay, so that is that's a sentence. It starts with a capital A and it ends with a full stop, and there's words in the middle. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to bust this up and basically break this down into its component parts. So now I have it all broken apart and in various sorts of colors. And then you're all looking at that going, yeah, okay, that's a nice colorful sentence there, Woody, so big deal. But anyway, so let me chop through this thing so that you understand what these basic parts are. Okay, so first of all, we got Allison, and she is what is referred to as the subject of the sentence. Okay, that's a very, very important part anyway. So because I wanted to use Allison because Allison's important. Okay, so so she is the noun. Okay, a noun is a person, place, or thing. So she is particularly the subject. Now, Allison would be technically a proper noun, meaning that that one over there has a name. Okay, it's not your woman. Okay, it's not she. Okay, now she is a pronoun, but Allison's a proper noun because she has there's a name there. So, but anyway, Allison is the subject of this sentence. And then we have the word bakes. Okay. Bakes is the verb, which is an action word. Okay, now there are different types of verbs, but the vast majority of verbs that we have in English are action words. Okay, the other very, very common verb is the verb to be, which is where we have is, are, were, was. Will be, that kind of stuff. So now, cake and shortbread are what is referred to as objects of the verb. So Allison is executing an action, and these are the result of this action. So cake and shortbread are objects, they're nouns as well, but the underlined bits there, ginger and buttery, are adjectives, which are descriptions. Okay, so these are describing words. So you could very easily say Allison bakes cake and shortbread. Okay, so the descriptions aren't necessary for the sentence construction, but they are helpful, obviously. Makes it more interesting, yes. So, I mean, it would be really boring if all you did was just bake boring old cake, ginger cake. There we go. So, buttery shortbread. Happy days. So, so Pelly's now looking for apple tart. Okay, all right. So, now, So now that red thing in there, and the word and is what is referred to as a conjunction. Okay. And a conjunction is a connecting word. So it could be used to connect two internal ideas, which is what's happening here with ginger cake and shortbread, because Allison is baking both of these things. But there are other sorts of connecting words, the likes of or nor, which are connecting words. But when you say or, generally you're saying either this or that, or neither this nor that. Okay, so there, whereas you would, if you're using the word and, you would say both this and that. Okay, so those are words that bring ideas together, or at least connect them in some way. Other kinds of conjunctions would be like but, yet, then, so those kinds of words are transitional conjunctions, which means it was raining today, but it cleared up in the afternoon. Okay, so it's a related statement to your first statement, but it's kind of saying, look, but there's a difference here. So the but is a difference, yet is like a difference. It's sort of taking you somewhere. Okay. Now, for the Bible study is what is referred to as a prepositional phrase, because of the word for. Okay, and there's loads of prepositions. Okay, there's the word for, there's the word of, there's the word before, there's the word after, there's the to the word to. There's a bunch of different words that act as prepositions, but you could again easily take that particular phrase and remove it, and it still won't affect the primary structure of the sentence. So now, lastly, then there's the underlined word the. Okay, the is important. A lot of people don't think the is really that important, but it is what is referred to as the definite article. And what the is it is pointing particularly at a particular thing. Okay, so it's not saying if the sentence was Allison bakes ginger cake and buttery shortbread for a Bible study, then a Bible study is what's referred to as an indefinite article, which means it could be any Bible study, but it's the Bible study. It's this one, So, so the word the in Hebrew was a particularly important word because it was always, oftentimes it was used in reference to the Lord. Okay, not a Lord, not somebody else's God or something like that, but the Lord. So there's a definite article. And then lastly here, the word regularly is what is referred to as an adverb, and that is a verb description. Okay, so that describes an action. So she bakes regularly. Okay, so that's attached to that particular word there. So you probably have discovered there's an awful lot of parts, to a given sentence. Now, this doesn't cover everything. I haven't covered indirect objects. I haven't covered gerunds. I haven't covered a whole host of other sorts of things. But so I put these things together particularly because most of these are being used in our passage today. So now, just to end this particular screen, however, Allison bakes is the main statement, and the other components are not necessary for the sentence to be a sentence. So if I want to boil this down to just sheer basics, 2 words, Allison bakes. That can stand on its own. So now all the rest of it contribute to it. So what I want to do is I want to take this kind of methodology here. So hello, come on in. Yeah, you're all right. No problem. So we're not actually too far into this. So we're just in Deuteronomy 6 and doing a lesson on grammar. Okay, so we're discovering how sentences are broken down. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the passage, read it again, and then we're going to start to highlight the subjects, the verbs, and then all the rest of the other stuff. But it's interesting because when you're able to do that, then you'll see really what's important. Okay, and that's the whole point of this, because sometimes we get invaded in our mind with a whole pile of words. We see stuff and we just go, what's going on? But if you take this idea and you say, okay, I need to go and find the subjects. I need to find the verb. What is the action word? What's going on? So now, anyway, so we'll look at this here. So again, Deuteronomy 6 verses 20 through 25. So I'll read this again to you and try to pick out where the subjects and verbs are. So now the ones that I'm going to pick out are the ones that I want to highlight. Okay, so there might be some that I haven't highlighted, but I'll let you know. So it says, when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is the meaning of the testimonies, the statutes, and the judgments which the Lord our God has commanded you, then you shall say to your son, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and the Lord showed signs and wonders before our eyes, great and severe, against Egypt, Pharaoh and all his household. And then he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in, to give us the land of which he swore to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. And then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord our God as he has commanded us. So, so before I highlight anything, the first verse there about when your son asks you, and then this is what you say to your son, I'm going to leave that bit out. So the thing that I want to concentrate on is, what do you say to your son? Okay, so it says, then you shall say to your son, and then from there we're going to start and look at the passage. So what sorts of things or people or whatever do you see as subjects in this passage? Yes, in a sense. That particular. So now, when you point out slaves, what specifically is yes, that's true. But in terms of that particular sentence, what is actually being said? Who's the slaves? It says we. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So it's we. All right. So we is the subject there of that particular sentence. Now so that's one we'll highlight. We'll explain that a little bit, because that is a little bit different, because that uses the verb to be, which is were and all that. So okay. Anybody anything else in terms of another person? I'll give you that. No, Pharaoh is not a subject. Us is technically an object.
Jesus Christ.
The Lord.
The Lord.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. Now we're sticking with the passage here. I know what you're saying, but Jesus isn't mentioned here. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. So what I'm trying to do here is to keep you contained to what it says. Okay. So you're right about Israel and that kind of thing, but actually it says we. Okay. So we have the Lord. So you have there in the middle of verse 21, and the Lord, brought, verse 22, the Lord showed, things like this. So, the Lord is there as a subject. Okay, so we've highlighted a few things here. Now, how about verbs? How about actions? What sorts of, since we've identified we and Lord, what sort of actions do you see sort of in there? So, yes, yes, that is a verb. That's a specialized verb. We'll get to that. In regard to Lord, what did the Lord brought? Okay, yeah. So, and then in verse 22, the Lord showed. Okay, so, and then verse 23, okay, he's the subject, but he's referring to the Lord, and brought. Okay, and things like this. So what we're doing was we're boiling this down to just its very, very, very basic component parts, and this is what you get. Okay, so we were slaves. Now, I'm going to qualify that a little bit because were is not an action. Okay, that is the verb to be in English is like an equal sign. So we is equal to slaves. Okay, so if you want to turn that into an action, you could say, we, acted as slaves or something like that, or we did slave things, so anyway, but that's more of an equal sign, so that's a little bit exceptional. But you can see there the Lord brought. Okay, the Lord showed. He brought. He might bring, and then there's also to give. Okay, so that's another action of what God is doing. The Lord commanded. He might preserve. And then we are careful. So in looking at that, how many times is we mentioned? And how many times is the Lord mentioned along with his pronoun? So, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So we is mentioned 2 times, and the Lord is mentioned either as the Lord or he 5 times. So now what does that say to you? So emphasis is on the Lord. Yep.
So you see there, the Lord in small letters, you have the Lord that says,
yeah,
he brought.
Yeah.
Why is
why is the Lord in small caps? Yeah. That is to basically the Hebrew word that is translated Lord is what we would refer to in English as either Yahweh or Jehovah. Okay, but that is a Western English way of trying to say something that you can't pronounce. Okay, right. So because the 4-letter name of God cannot be pronounced. Okay, so in English, as it's written down, that was written out in all caps. Now, there is the word Lord, that is capital L, lowercase O-R-D, that you would find in the Old Testament as well. That is a different Hebrew word, that is Adonai, which means my Lord, okay, or my master. So it's if I can put it this way without sounding irreverent, it's a slightly lesser version of the name Lord that is capitalized with all caps. Okay, so because the 4-letter name of God was, the Jews had such reverence for it, they just didn't go there in terms of trying to say it. So anytime they read passages of scripture in the Old Testament, they would have substituted it with the word Adonai, or at other times when they were talking amongst themselves, they would refer to the Lord as Hashem, which means the name. So, they wouldn't even go there saying, because, even saying Adonai was a bit of a bridge too far in some cases. So, but anyway, so you can see here when you look strictly at the subjects and strictly at the action verbs, it actually tears away the vast majority of the paragraph. But so when you look at where we is mentioned both times, one is at the beginning and one is at the end. Okay, so you have we were slaves, and where it says were, that's a past tense thing. So now what we're going to do next week is we're going to talk about tenses of verbs, because that's an important thing to get your head around, because in English you have about 3 broad tenses of verbs. Hebrew had 57. So anyway, I'll not try to go and give you a Hebrew lesson, but anyway, it is, people say we're getting more sophisticated. In actual fact, we're getting less sophisticated. So, but.
Sorry, we were slaves.
Yeah.
But we're not anymore, because the Lord brought.
Yeah. Yes.
We were served and we were careful and he commanded. That's why they're no longer slaves.
That's correct. Yeah. So the first statement of we were slaves, that is in the past tense. So that is no longer the case. Okay. So, but what God is emphasizing here is the Lord brought, the Lord showed, he brought, he might bring, he gave, he commanded, he preserves. Okay. Yeah. So, and then as a result of that, we're careful. Okay. So, and I myself found this exercise helpful, because what it does is it concentrates the passage, and you go, right, this is very basically what's going on. Now, so we have subject and verb. Okay. Now, the next thing is, in order to make these sentences a little more interesting, is it has an object. Okay. So here comes the objects. All right. So the Lord brought us. Okay, so the Lord didn't just bring, in a vague sort of a sense. The Lord, there's an object to that bringing. Okay, so the Lord brought us. The Lord showed signs and wonders. The Lord brought us. The Lord might bring us to give us the land. Now, the reason I have land underlined there is because land is what's referred to as an indirect object. Okay, us is the object or direct object, and land is the indirect object. That generally happens only with the verb to give. Okay, so because someone is given something, but as they're given that thing, they themselves is the object of the activity of giving, but what they get is the indirect object. Okay. So and then the Lord commanded us. The Lord might preserve us. What's the vast majority of the objects in terms of a word? Us. Okay. So what that demonstrates to me is that God is very interested in us. Okay. So again, find this useful, because sometimes we get caught up in the big menagerie of words and what's going on and this, that, and the other thing. And what we need to see was, what is God doing, and who is he doing it to? Well, it's us. It's not somebody else. It's not the, nations of the world, or it's not the cat and the dog and, all that kind of stuff. It's us. So now all these statements in here can all stand on their own. So if this is all we had, that would work. So all that other stuff. Okay. But all the other stuff is important, and we'll see that here just shortly. So now there's a lot of other stuff that then pops in. Now, these are all the prepositional phrases. So in that first verse there, it says where we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay, so there's two prepositional phrases there. One is of Pharaoh, and the other is in Egypt, because of is a preposition, in is a preposition. So what that says to me, when you see the word of, I think possession. So we were slaves of Pharaoh, so we were Pharaoh's slave. All right. Now the Pharaoh and that kind of thing it's a person. Now then it says in Egypt, so that's a place. And when I see the word in, I think a particular spot, there. Okay. So now when I generate my mind Pharaoh in Egypt, does that generate a good scene? If we were slaves there? No, it doesn't. So that was a bad place. So we had a bad master and a bad place. Okay. So now the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. So we have two prepositional phrases there, out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Okay. So out is as opposed to in. Okay. So, in is, we're stuck. Out is we're free. Okay. So now how did God do that? He did it with a mighty hand. So now this is all tied in with describing basically what brought is about. Okay. So God is looking at the place where we were, and he does it with a mighty hand. Okay, and then the Lord showed signs and wonders before our eyes. Before is a preposition, so that phrase is before our eyes. So these signs and wonders that God showed us are where? They're right in front of us. God wasn't doing stuff behind the door. He wasn't saying things to us and says, "Oh, by the way, this is what I've done, but you can't see it." No. He showed us signs and wonders where? Before our eyes. So we can see these things. And then next, he brought us out from there. So that's, again, re-emphasizing, getting out of Egypt. And he might bring us in. Okay. Yeah. Almost sounds like, when I read these verses, and particularly being in Ireland, you almost think this sounds Irish. It's like, you brought us out to bring us in. You see, if you say this in other Southern European countries, if you were to translate this quite literally, they would really get confused. Okay, because I remember when I was in Portugal years ago, and we said to a particular individual, hurry up and come down from there. And honestly, the Portuguese just got completely wired up in their heads, because they were just like, you're saying up and then down. That's opposite directions, So but and we don't have a problem with that, because we're when we use the word up, we're using that in terms of time, and then down, we're then disconnecting that from the time thing and making an actual physical drop. So English is an awful language. That's why non-English speakers have such a difficult time with English. So because we have all these kinds of double standards and things. But
I'm saying not to an autistic child either.
That's correct. Yes, because autistic children are very, very literal. So, so then it says the Lord commanded us to observe these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always. So that's three prepositional phrases right in a row there. To observe. Now that's packed with a bit of action in there in terms of observing. That's the doing of things. To fear, that's to respect and reverence God. and then it's for our good always. So so if we just left it, the Lord commanded us, okay, well that works, but we need some bulk to it, so we need things to be added to that in order to emphasize what is going on. And then in terms of the last set of prepositional statements, we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord our God. So there's two prepositional phrases there: to observe all these commandments, and then before the Lord our God. So but that's a responsibility of ourselves, which is we need to be careful. God's commanded us to do this, and then we respond by observing all these commandments, not just some of them, all of them, and we do it before God. So so those are all the prepositions, prepositional phrases. So you can see, how this thing sort of builds up. You start with the subject, you start with and then you move to the verb, and you say, okay, there's the main primary fundamental stuff, and then you add the object to it, add the prepositional phrases to it, and so we have really the majority of the paragraph. Now the rest of it here is other sorts of things that lend itself to the structure of the paragraph. So we'll not get into all of what all that's about, other than it does add to the thing. So verse 20 and the first part of verse 21 was basically the setting of the stage. Now there is subjects and verbs there. So it's when your son, there's a subject, asks, okay, that's a verb, but we didn't look at those things specifically. So but just to sort of recap this, what's going on, because sometimes you can get caught up in a lot of detail, okay, because we went through an awful lot of steps there and a lot of procedure and things like that. But now we can put this together and see what this is about. So basically starts off with the question. Okay, the question is, when your son asks you why we do these things. Okay, so and we know that in life, people, not only family, but other people are going to ask, why do you go to church? Why do you not curse? Why do you do certain things or not do certain things? People pick up on that. And some people might ask, maybe sarcastically, because they might know you're a Christian, say, why on earth do you not do these things? You don't seem to be particularly free, So, but Elaine and I were up in the Amish country up in Pennsylvania, and saw a lot of Amish people knocking about in their horse and carts and all that kind of stuff. And you might look at that and say, those people are all caught up in legalism, or they're caught up in stuff and things and being very austere and only wearing monocolored clothes, if indeed it's that particular ordnon. It could be something that's a bit more liberal with Mennonites and stuff. But in actual fact, when you sit down with those people and you speak to them, they're free in their minds. They're free in their spirits, and they're seeking to honor God in what they're doing, So a lot of it depends on worldview and how you understand things. It's as I was sitting with different non-Christian family and that kind of thing, you can understand why they come to certain kinds of conclusions, because their worldview is based on stuff that is not God-centered. So basically, the real difference is whether God is in the middle of it or God is not in the middle of it. So because when I sat down with Christian friends and family and that kind of thing, who was in the middle of it? God. And it was tremendous. It was wonderful. It was liberating. It was freeing. And I went and saw my friend Dale, who I hadn't seen that since 1986. Saw Jim Dubs that I hadn't seen since probably 1995. My friend Heather, who I hadn't seen since 1993, and other people I hadn't seen for many years as well. And but all those people have Christ in common, and you were able just to pick up where you left off, no problem, no drama, you know. And but see, with the unsaved, you're going, hey, yeah, the weather. You know, that's why people talk about the weather all the time, because guess what? The weather is common to everybody. You know, so but anyway, so here's the question, and here starts the answer. So the answer is a testimony. So you know, one thing that we've always been very clear with our children is our testimony. Now, some people, they find maybe some of their past somewhat embarrassing, so they don't want to talk about it. They just say, yeah, I got saved when I was such and such an age, but you know, don't really want to go there. Don't want to give glory to the devil or something, you know. So you know, give some kind of excuse like that. But you know, one thing that is said in here quite clearly is we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt. You know, there's a lot packed into that, and that can be unpacked more. So, but the thing is that the concentration level in terms of the testimony is not bulked up with we were slaves. It's what God did. God brought us out. God brought us out. God showed. God did this. God gave, you know. And so that is the majority of the concentration of the testimony. So let's break this down and look at it a bit. So the first part is where we were. Okay. So wrong place, old life, and wrong master, the world, and wrong activity, slavery. Okay. So I think we could probably fairly easily look at our own testimonies and go, you know what? I had an old life, I had an old master, and I had a place that I was enslaved to. You know, whether that was to, you know, the people that I work with in terms of drinking, drugs, and bad relationships and that kind of stuff, or within your own selves, it's your own pride and your own self-sufficiency or whatever, you know. So, but that's where it starts. Now, where it then goes is what God did. Okay. And so the Lord did what we could not do for ourselves to enter a better place where God wants us to prosper. So now you have to remember that Deuteronomy was written just before the children of Israel went into the promised land. So the promised land had not been realized yet. But God is making cast iron promises. So they were actually able to look at this in really what is referred to as a future perfect tense, which is God's done this and it is good as done. Or God will do this, but it is as good as done. So, and then it continues on, what our response then should be, okay? Because, you know, the first part was where we were, then what God did, what our response should be, and that is to be careful to observe and do what the Lord has commanded us. You know, that's the only reasonable sort of response to what God does, is you take responsibility. You own what you have, or you know, you own what God gives. And I unfortunately know a lot of people that they talk about where they were, they see what God has done, but they don't carry out what God tells them to do. And yeah, sure. Yeah, because because God wants us to respect Him and reverence Him. You know, that actually affords to us a balanced lifestyle. Because when you don't fear God, then as it says in Proverbs, the fear of man is a snare, So we could end up being sidelined by the fear of man, or we could be sidelined by our own arrogance and say, oh, I've got this made. I know what's happening. All right, thanks God, dead on, but I'm going to take it from here. So what are the benefits then after we have responded properly? Our good, life in God, and his righteousness. And again, that's what it says. It talks about for our good. Okay. And to preserve life. But real life only exists in God. Outside of God is no life. It's existence at best and death at worst. And then it talks about righteousness. Now, righteousness in the Bible is really about doing the right thing. Now, whose assessment are we talking about what's right and what's wrong? It's God's. So that's why I say his righteousness. Oops. So that's the how this thing really boils down. But how I sort of came to these conclusions is I went through, found the subject, found the action word, found the objects, found the prepositional phrases that kind of bulk it out and that kind of thing. And then that helped me to then come to this testimony. So so I think you can use this as an outline and say, right, well, I can talk to my kids. I can talk to them about where I was, what God did, what my responsibility is, and what the benefits are. And praise the Lord for that. Yep. So, and the interesting thing here is, because the statement about, we were slaves in of Pharaoh in Egypt, that's pretty much the statement about the old life. Whereas when I hear some testimonies, they spend 75, 80% on that bit. And then they say, God saved my soul. Praise the Lord. Thanks very much. And I'll shake your hand at the door. But really, I think when people hear how this is spaced out and dealt with, they're going to hear about what God did, so when I was speaking in the States, the various churches I was speaking at, and as Elaine and I were talking about these things, we were talking about, emphasize what God does. And it was great to be able to concentrate on that and lift up the name of the Lord Jesus Christ in terms of what he does, because, as we lift him up, then he draws all men to himself. See, if you lift yourself up, and again, this is the problem with some Christian testimonies that we hear all the war stories and all the thing and all that kind of thing. And so what you hear is then a man's story. God gets kind of thrown in there as a bit of a mix in, a little bit of salt and pepper. But that's not the main thing.
Stuff. If you're sitting there, it's more like an entertainment that you're listening to.
Yeah. Yeah, look at that. I wish I had that testimony or something, or that, boy, that was something, yeah. And it sometimes ends up becoming an entertainment thing. And now, those of you that have heard Elaine speak, my wife, she is a very, very good speaker. And she is serious, but she has her bits of humor and the things. So but I remember we went to give testimony one time, and I was either the taxi driver or spoke about stars at the end. But I remember the woman getting up afterwards and says, that was really entertaining. And Elaine's response to that afterwards was, I am not doing this no more. If that's what it ends up being, is entertainment, stuff it. I'm not here to entertain. I'm here to lift up the name of Christ. And so we sort of went to and fro and had a discussion about, are we going to continue going down this road of going and giving testimony? Because it's not about entertainment.
Not about giving somebody a laugh.
Yeah. So And you'll get loads of people to come out, to hear the funny stuff. Now I think it's fine to have the interjection of funny things. I do that on occasion, and so. But I do that for emphasis, not to again draw attention to myself and say, "Hey, I'm a funny guy." So I remember at my church back home, one of the elders there wanted me to be in charge of entertainment at the retreat, and Elaine says to the guy, she says, "Yeah, but Woody's not funny." So now that was early on in our marriage. So, but it was kind of a funny statement, So anyway, but yes. So anyway, but so humor's a good thing. It's but as my father would say, all work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy. So, but. Anyway, so that is that. So